What happens when we die? That may be one of life's greatest mysteries. Today, we're going to hear the stories of some people who've come close to death but have lived to tell about it. My guest, James Walton, is a family therapist who studied near-death experiences. I'm very happy to have you here today.
Thank you very much for having me on the show. It's really nice meeting you.
You're welcome. So what exactly qualifies as a near-death experience? How close do you have to get?
Well, a near-death experience is a subjective experience for the individual. There is no objective way at this time to stand back and look at it and to to separate it from the experience. Where when someone's doing research on a plant, they take it out of the ground, they take it into the laboratory, they're able to dissect it, they remove it from its environment in order to study its processes. With a near-death experience, it's not like that. You can't separate the subject from its experience, so it has to be studied differently. So you can't say from the outside, by looking at the individual, oh, I can see by looking at you, you've had a near-death experience. It has to be self-reported, and so we have to have belief or faith that the individual doing the reporting is making an accurate report about their internal world. So what qualifies for a near-death experience is a self-reported feeling of a trauma to the body and then leaving the body. And oftentimes what happens in the near-death experience is the person, let's say they're in an accident, and they find themselves face on with a collision, and then they just find themselves popping out of their body. And they're standing next to themselves at that moment. And a lot of times they don't even recognize the body that they're looking at themselves as their own. So they're watching this.
Now, are many of these people actually clinically dead, or they have been clinically dead and then brought back? Is that?
Yes, there are many cases of people who are clinically dead where the EKG goes flat.
And so that's something that's medically verifiable. I mean, you can have the doctor say that he died on the operating table and we brought him back.
Yes, yes.
Okay.
In fact, Michael Saban, who is the head cardiologist at St. Luke's Hospital in Denver, was fascinated by this because as a cardiologist, he had a lot of access to medical records, and of course, there were a lot of people who would die or die and then be resuscitated. And because modern science, especially recently, has become so good at bringing people back from the brink of death, that we're going to be hearing more and more stories about near-death experiences. Technology is allowing us to do that. And so what he did was he went into the records and then started following some of his own patients who had reported near-death experiences, and he could look at the medical record and see, yes, the EKG went flat, and look at what happened medically at that time, and then he interviewed those people. And he did a 5-year study on this, and he at first was setting out to disprove that NDEs existed. He wanted to try to prove that it was a figment of the imagination, that it was a hallucination that was taking place with the individual. And what he ended up doing was convincing himself that it was a real experience and finding out for himself that it was real. And then he now goes around and promotes the idea.
Now, I've heard too that sometimes people will remember certain details from when they were unconscious, that people will say, well, they couldn't have known that because they were knocked out, or they were dead, or their eyes were closed, or they were, they couldn't have known that so-and-so was present, but yet they'll recall those kind of things. And that goes back to what you said about the people being out of the body and looking down on things. And
yes, well, even Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, who was a well-known thanatologist, I don't know, you may have heard of her, she helped a lot of people with death and dying that were close to the end of their lives, and whether it was age or illness. And she tells of a story where there was a woman in an accident who experienced a near-death experience, and in the experience, she saw a friend of hers who came to her in the experience. And when she recovered from the accident and then she recounted this near-death experience, she said that this individual was there in the near-death experience who was known to be alive at the time. So it was very strange that this person who was alive shows up in this near-death experience, and what she found out later was she was killed just before her own accident.
Oh, that's amazing.
And appears in the near-death experience.